Hi, everyone. It's really nice to see the full house here on a Friday afternoon, especially after the coffee break, so I'm very glad everybody stays here, because the alternative could have been an early happy hour outside. If my computer allows me to work, there it comes. I'm a systems modeler. I look into complex and dynamic systems with stakeholders, how we can bring all stakeholders, different disciplines, different sectors, how we can bring them on board, and how we can collectively co-generate knowledge and identify the problematic areas, identify the leverage points in this complexity, and move on, come up with proper sustainable solutions. So here I'm today to talk 15 minutes, strict 15 minutes, about the work that we do in food systems transformation in Europe, basically. A topic that I can speak for the rest of the weekend here, if you have the time and courage. But I'll try to be very strict on what we do and how we do, and particularly, if you're talking about this food systems transformation, what elements needs to be there. So to be able to have this nice narrative so that we can have everybody on board, we need to understand what we're talking about. So for that reason, I'll just quickly go through a couple of slides, putting the major environmental and socioeconomic issues, the global key challenges that we face, and how to overcome those things. If you look at the global level, food production, land-based food production, there's so much wrong things in the system. 1/3 of the greenhouse emissions globally comes from the agriculture. We use 50% of the habitable land for agriculture. 70% of the global freshwater withdrawals goes to agriculture. Almost 80% of the global ocean and freshwater pollution, eutrophication, is directly linked to agriculture. I don't need to talk about this massive industrial level meat and dairy production. A very simple supply chain. We produce crop either directly for human consumption, or we feed our animals. We process it, pack it, wrap it, make it available in the market so that we can all consume. But here, the primary production, it's a bit problematic. So the way we use our resources, our scarce resources, is like, it doesn't make sense. As I mentioned, we use 50% of what is habitable for agriculture. In that agricultural practices, almost 80% goes for livestock production, so meat and dairy production. To get what? To get less than 20% of the calories that we need and less than 40% of the proteins that we need. So there's a big, big, big inefficiency in the system. And of course, like, this is global figure, so Iceland, we can park it at the moment. It doesn't perhaps apply here with the animal production I'm talking about. And it's same for the other type of resources in the primary production. The way we extract and use the water for agriculture, and how much we extract on the cost of all the energy, money, and how inefficiently we use that thing. The energy that we use, we put 10 kilocalories of fossil fuel in the system to get 1 calorie of food, so it doesn't make sense. The way we spread all the chemicals, pesticides, the use of the nutrients, all the problems around that, not only for human, but for the nature as well. I don't want to mention all those things. But clearly, in the primary production, there's a lot of things that needs to be done much better. And of course, everything is driven by the way we buy things, our consumption patterns, the habits. There are probably, like, if not hundreds, there's so many different criteria that shapes our consumer preferences. I will not dig into that. But mainly it's the culture, the education, the social network that we belong to, the information that we receive from the packaging material, the traceability, the credibility of that information. So these are the things that affects our per capita consumptions. But also, of course, the whole global population, ever increasing exponentially global population. We're up to 8.3 billion now. So these are the driving force for the whole consumption. So coming back to the primary production, the use of these resources in the primary production are the main reasons why we have all the environmental challenges that I showed in my first slide. So the soil fertility loss, the soil water pollution, the whole land use change, how it affects the biodiversity, And not only due to the land use change, but current agricultural practices, how we go for monocrops, like early in the last centuries when we had almost 500 different types of lettuce. Towards the end of the century, we had like 40, just because we select the crops that gives us the most yield and go for monocropping, intensive and extensive production. Climate change, everybody talks about climate change. We know, I mean, it's 1/3 of the global greenhouse gas globally comes from the food sector. But when you dig into where in the system, in the food sector, these emissions occur, 80%, more than 80%, it's the primary production. It's the way we use the land to produce the crop and the livestock. Only less than 20% is the rest of the supply chain. So the transportation, processing, packaging, retail. So when I hear colleagues talking about, yeah, but we will use this type of like biodegradable, biocompostable packaging material and then replace it with the synthetic plastic, and with this substitution we will address the emission reductions, I say stop. Because it's not that, I mean, they are doing excellent job, but the narrative is wrong. If you talk about impact, you see where the impact lies. If they have another narrative and go for instance, through the waste, globally 1/3 of what we produce in the system is considered as food loss and waste. And if you look into the emissions directly linked to that amount, it's 6% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So if this was a country, after US and China, it will be the 3rd biggest emitting country. So if such a packaging material can somehow address the shelf life, extending the shelf life, and then thus addressing the reduction in the waste, you're indirectly addressing the emission reduction. So I think the impact lies through that way. Yes, waste, again, I mean, I will not go deep into all these figures. Again, as I said, I can speak so much, there's so much information here, but I will go for quickly just setting the scene. Different parts of the world, different geographies have different rates, China versus Europe, and there's a reason for that. Some parts of the countries, for some parts of the globe, we have the well-established cold chains, logistics behind storage, so there's less food loss and waste in those countries, whereas in some countries we don't have these facilities and then there's higher. And it's not only the environmental issues, there's so much wrong on the socioeconomic side as well. So far I only talked about the resources and environmental impact of that, but starting with the labor, the whole labor scarcity, the young generation not really willing to continue what they've learned from their parents. The whole animal welfare, with this industrial level animal production, extensive use of antibiotics, the whole life standards for the animals, it's a huge issue. Food security, I mean, making it food available in the market is something, but making it accessible to all is a totally different thing. And that's why we fail, unfortunately, globally, having this global food inequality. Almost 3 billion people in this moderate to severe and severe zone, meaning that there are people going out days without nutritious, cheap, easily accessible food. And of course, if it's not accessible, if it's not consumed, it has direct impact to human health. And this is why we observe all this undernourished, almost 1 billion people globally, mainly in Asia and Africa, and projection says that will only increase. So these are all the wrong things in the system that we currently have globally. And of course, I mean, undernourished is something. We have so much problem with obesity, with overweight people, almost like 2 billion, more than 2 billion people globally again. The amount of money that it is spent for this sector, the pressure that we face in the economy in different countries, it's enormous. And these are all interlinked to each other. So how to identify the right solutions, right sustainable solutions? How can we bring everybody on board to make this narrative right so that everybody agrees on? So with that, we can go for transformation. So to be able to accelerate this transformation, to make things happen, we need to have everybody on board. I see 2 clear leverage points. One is, of course, doing the primary production right. how can we address this issue? There's so much that can be done differently. The whole regenerative agriculture, no-tillage, diverse crop rotations, the cover cropping, etc. Animal integration. So don't get me wrong, I'm not against the animal production, because I'll, in a second, talk about that. We need to have the animal in our systems to close the nutrient cycles. And then, of course, depending on what issue you want to address, whether it's the fertilizer use, how much efficiently we can use that, there's plenty of things that can be done there, from technology, such as the whole water, soil management, the whole precision farming using drones technology, from financial incentives. It's not like the 60s, the Green Revolution. We cannot subsidize the nutrients, the fertilizers. The whole agroecology, I name it with the regenerative agriculture, but there's so much that can be done from the soil level to crop level to field level, landscape, on the policy level. The whole plant breeding, you can simply shift from one type of crop to another type of crop, such as like with this nitrogen fixation, the root structure of the legumes is one thing, but also we can use the whole technology, the new genomic techniques, the new plant breeding. So there's so much opportunities out there. And again, this is just for the fertilizer use. For each of this resource use, there's plenty of alternatives out there. But if you look at the intensive industrial level animal production, almost 60% of the emissions coming from the food sector is directly linked to the animal production. So the way we produce the animal, the feed, and clear cut and deforestation related to land use change, creating the greenhouse gas emissions. So how to address this? How can we diversify our protein sources? Over the past 6 years or so, we've been working on this very heavily, try to see what are these options, what are these alternative proteins, anything from plant-based to insects to industrial biotechnology. There's this novel type of production from precision fermentation, biomass fermentation, cultivated meat. So using algae, micro, using the side streams from agri and aquaculture. So there's plenty of opportunities out there. So we identify these new technologies. We identify who are the stakeholders involved in different types of production of new plant, novel proteins. Together with them, a series of workshops, we identify, okay, how the systems look like today and how it looks like in the future. How can we backgas? How can we make this transformation happen? What needs to be in place? What hurdles do we face? How to overcome those things? These are all long learning processes and long cogenerational knowledge. And based on those, we develop models, systems dynamics modeling. You can make decision support tools to see what if I change this part in the system, how the whole system will react to that. So this type of discussions led in the last 3 years or so, big projects. I would say now we're in the middle of a portfolio of probably like 20 million euro of projects, looking into environmental, social life cycle analysis of producing this type of novel proteins from different biotechnology or cultivated meats. So how we can use animal cells or microorganisms in bioreactors and produce this type of proteins. We look into the techno-economic assessments. We look into the nutritious side of the whole system, how good or bad these new technologies are. We look into different business models around that. Will it be centralized or decentralized? We look into the regulatory aspects. What is in place? The whole supporting regulatory and legislative framework, is it in place? If not, how we can make this happen? So there are many different dimensions. I've heard about the earlier talks as well. So definitely we need orchestrators, enablers, like the way I work with EIT Food. Probably it's the world's biggest organization when it comes to food systems transformation. It's European Institute for Innovation and Technology. Or FESTA, so this kind of cluster, this kind of accelerator that can bring different sectors, different disciplines, different people on board and discuss. Of course, technology is something, the product is one thing. I think we're there in terms of what can be done, produced. But the legislation, the whole support from AI, bringing this many people is one thing, but working with them is another thing. So what kind of tools, methods, and approaches exist in applied system science that we can make this communication happen, that we can understand this complexity better, so we can address all of the issues under different future scenarios. Now I see that I'm over my time. I think I will stop. I'm sorry, I have to stop here, but I'll be here for the rest of the day, so if there's anybody interested, I would be more than happy to discuss further.